first question tonight is one that seems to come up quite often. Luang Por, should we aim to be a bodhisattva in our practice or an arahant? It's a free world, you can aim for whatever you like. But as students of the Buddha, following in his footsteps, following the path, our aim should really be the end of suffering, which is in the here and now, freeing our mind from the causes of suffering, mental defilements, and abandoning them and experiencing Nirodha, the cessation of suffering. So, realizing, penetrating the Four Noble Truths is really, if you're following the teachings of the Buddha, that's everybody's duty. But there are those who maybe have strength of mind and various qualities that they've developed over their practice, and they wish to share and give, and maybe they're capable of giving and leading and sharing with others. But what does somebody who shares the Dhamma with others do? Well, they encourage others to practice and realize the Four Noble Truths. So you may call somebody who's made that aspiration to help others along their way a bodhisattva. Strictly speaking, a bodhisattva or bodhisattva is somebody who's made a vow or resolution to practice until they become a Buddha. So following in the example of our own Buddha, we know the past life of the Buddha. He was Sumedha, the hermit, and inspired by seeing and practicing with Dipankara, the Buddha, in that lifetime. Many eons ago, he made a solemn wish or vow to practice to become a Buddha, in the same way that there was Dipankara Buddha in that lifetime. He wished to become a Buddha. Sumedha the hermit, he was already probably quite an attained spiritual practitioner. Had sila, had samadhi, had wisdom, had many great qualities, and obviously great compassion, because that's why people become bodhisattvas. They wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings, out of compassion. And Dipankara, the Buddha, in his great knowledge at that time, confirmed and made a prediction that Sumedha would one day become a Buddha, and he'd be known as Gautama. And he became Gautama the Buddha from our era. Most people, they encounter the Buddha's teachings and they put them into practice, and they're thinking in terms of freeing their mind from mental defilement. And that's what the Buddha taught. That's the Noble Eightfold Path. It's for the freeing a human mind, liberating a human mind from mental defilements, to put an end to suffering. So, in our modern era, we have plenty of examples of people who have done that, particularly monks and nuns, who have practiced to the end of suffering. They become arahanta sāvaka, enlightened students of the Buddha. But if someone has the energy to make that commitment to become a Buddha in the future, well, they may one day become a bodhisattva. But in the beginning, it's just an aspiration, isn't it? It's just a thought. for the benefit of all beings. And whether they can stick to that thought life after life, that's a good question, because it's many, many lifetimes before someone becomes a Buddha. Many, we say, incalculable periods of time, many asankhayas and kalpas, periods of a world system, the decline and fall of a world system. A long, long, long time. So you have to be ready for the long haul if you're following the bodhisattva path. Nevertheless, there are those who have done that. So in our era, a famous example would be Kruba Sivichai, who was a monk who was around at the time of Luang Por Man. And Luang Por Man was considered to be an arahant, but he knew Kruba Sivichai and he told everyone to respect him. But he was considered to be a bodhisattva, practicing to become a Buddha in the future. And both taught much the same thing. Kruba Sivichai and Luang Por Man taught the Four Noble Truths, taught people to practice dana, sila, bhavana. So from the outside, I think most people wouldn't be able to tell who is a bodhisattva, who is an arahant. Because a true bodhisattva will be practicing much the same as an arahant, keeping the precepts, cultivating meditation, practicing, purifying their own mind, but also teaching the Dhamma to others. Of course, Luang Por Chah was asked this question and he answered, don't be anything. Don't be a bodhisattva, don't be an arahant, because as you're practicing, that wish to be something is another, albeit subtle, mental defilement. It can be a cause for craving, attachment, becoming, birth. It can become your projection of your sense of self. I am bodhisattva. I'm practicing to be a bodhisattva. I am practicing to be an arahant. As long as it's a concept that you're attaching to, then it's suffering and the cause of suffering. So Ajahn Chah used to say, well, don't be anything. Sometimes we're practicing, we want to be a good person, we want to be enlightened, or we want to attain certain things, or we want to help others, which are all good thoughts in themselves, but when you attach to them, if there's still a sense of self, then they still become a cause for suffering. Hence you sometimes get people arguing, bodhisattva, arahant, which is better. But we practice for the end of suffering. And if you make that your goal, then you just see how it goes. Maybe you can help a few people along your way. But if you really aspire to become a Buddha, that's going to be a long, long, long path of practice, so be prepared for that. Perhaps the most valuable thing at the moment in your life, I would say, is practice for the end of suffering in the here and now. See if you can do that. Because if you can't do it for yourself, it's going to be difficult to teach it to other people. So you really have to understand these Four Noble Truths, penetrate them with your own understanding and wisdom, and then you pass some of that on to another person maybe. Another question. Dear Venerable Luang Por, as I contemplate the impermanent nature of things during daily life, I notice many of my strong attachments diminishing. However, I am also experiencing a lack of enthusiasm to do things to the same high standard that I used to. as I don't desire these things strongly anymore. I fear that this is a disadvantage to my family. Could you please provide some guidance? Well, I think you're right, aren't you? You contemplate impermanence. You know that however much effort you put into creating something, doing something, it's impermanent, so it won't last. So it does take a little bit of the edge off, doesn't it? But maybe what you're describing, this sort of loss of enthusiasm, is actually a subsiding of craving. Like you say, if you know something's impermanent, then you don't perhaps grasp at it with so much passion and craving. But it doesn't mean to say if something is good and worthwhile and helpful to yourself, to others, that you shouldn't do it. So this is where you have to practice mindfulness and reflect and sharpen your understanding. So, as we're just talking about just now, about bodhisattvas and arahants, just because somebody reaches the goal of their practice, say an arahant, doesn't mean to say they stop doing things, stop teaching, helping other people, and they do that as well as they can. But the world is an imperfect place, it's an impermanent place. So whatever they do, they know at the same time that things are impermanent, so they're ready to accept that and let go. So when you're practicing the Dhamma, you can still do a good job. If you practice cultivating the path, say mindfulness, energy, using wisdom to solve problems, do things as you go along in your practice, well, there may be many times when you try to do a good job for your benefit and for the benefit of others. But as you say, you know it's impermanent. So however good it will never be perfect because it's impermanent. So, there's that famous story, Luang Por Chah finished building his Uposatha hall, which was a nice new design, unique design, and everyone had put a lot of effort into it. And they opened it. It's opened by the Queen of Thailand, and all was good. And then a group of people came to visit from Bangkok, and Luang Por Chah was showing them around. And because the Uposatha hall had been built on raised earth that the monks brought in and kind of created a mound of earth in the centre of the monastery, but in those days there was no heavy machinery to compact the earth. So the hall was built on this raised earth which hadn't been compacted probably as well as it could have been. So it was imperfect, not the best. Later on it cracked. There was a big crack in the concrete slab. Didn't ruin the building, it just didn't look good. And so as this group of visitors from Bangkok are walking around, they pointed out the crack in the slab to Luang Por Chah, and Luang Por Chah just answered, well, if there was no crack, there'd be no Buddhism. Meaning the Buddha was pointing out the cracks in the universe, the cracks in the world, the imperfections and the impermanence of the world. And this crack is just confirming what the Buddha taught, that all conditions are impermanent, including concrete slabs in religious buildings. Doesn't mean to say the monks didn't try and do the best job they could to build it with the villagers. Generally when people do things in a monastery, they try their best to do a good job. But at the same time, they know it's impermanent. And you can practice like that. So it doesn't necessarily diminish your energy to do it good, but it just, it helps you to manage your expectations and your understanding as you're doing the things that are valuable to you and that maybe are helpful to you and others. course, when you understand impermanence, then yes, there may be certain activities you give up because you see them as not beneficial or not that useful. And they're impermanent anyway, so you can let them go. So the more we practice the Dhamma, then sometimes it modifies our behavior and we make choices, and sometimes we decide to give up certain activities because we think, well, it's just impermanent, it's not really helping my practice, I'll let that go. But you don't give up everything, and it doesn't mean to say you can't put effort into doing a good job if you've decided to do something that's useful. But you do know it's impermanent. And this will save you suffering, won't it? Once you see impermanence in your mind and in the world around you, in different situations, that will free your mind from stress and suffering. I always remember the time we lifted a brand new heavy bronze Buddha statue onto a shrine at Wat Marpjan. There's a beautiful marble shrine had been made to receive the Buddha. You know, the monks are lifting it by hand, so it's heavy work, it's hard work, difficult, and everyone's trying to do the best they can, and nobody wanted to scratch the shrine. You do the best you can, but just at the very last moment as we were lifting the Buddha into place, it hit the very edge of the shrine, this marble, the kind of corner of the marble, which is the most brittle part, and a little bit chipped off, just as the Buddha was settling down into place. So it's like we did a good job, got the Buddha into place, but then we have a bit of chipped marble. And everyone was sort of deflated a bit. Oh, we got the Buddha in, oh, now we've chipped the marble. And everyone's looked to Ajahn and sort of waiting to see what he would say, wondering if he'd tell us all off for chipping the marble. And he just said, oh yes, we're just finding out that also marble is impermanent too. That's all you can say, isn't it? You try the best, but sometimes things happen. So just seeing impermanence doesn't mean to say you give up on the world, but it just allows you to understand what's going on and accept sometimes mistakes are made, things aren't the best, aren't the most perfect, but you can still try your best. You know, you put energy, put effort into things, and you certainly do that in your meditation. Seeing impermanence is the best that a human mind can do, isn't it? Because it's an insight that frees your mind from suffering. But maybe with other conditions, it modifies your understanding, so you know thoughts are impermanent, feelings impermanent, the material world is impermanent. Another question. I have been practicing mindfulness almost in all activities for the past 6 to 8 months using Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa as my mantra, while maintaining clear awareness at the same time. I switch to watching my breath when I stay idle, sitting, lying down, or when I do nothing. However, I find it difficult to stay mindful at the same time when I am communicating with someone or engaging in my work, as the mind can't multitask at one moment. After the conversation, my mind can re-establish mindfulness and clear awareness in no time, and maintain my sati until I start another conversation. Is this the correct practice? And if no, can you please give me some pointers? Thank you. Well, over the centuries, people have used different words and phrases as meditation objects. So using Namo Tassa Bhagavato is quite a common one. Yeah, for some people it arouses faith, energy, brings the mind to pay attention to the present moment and think of the Buddha, and brings up many skillful qualities. So if you found it helpful, that sounds like a good one. And it will help you to maintain present moment awareness, mindfulness, and that can support wisdom, clear comprehension and understanding. So fine, carry on with that. Or if you use that, like you've said, you do the recitation, but then when you're ready you switch to the breath, which is you might say is a more refined meditation object. Well, that sounds good as well. When you're ready, then you turn to just be aware of the breath, and you maybe drop the recitation of the word, the mantra. I like it, you say, I switch to watching my breath when I stay idle. Well, you're not idle if you're watching your breath, you're doing something. But I think I know what you mean. When you don't have to particularly concentrate on anything else, you don't have to work, think, talk, then I wouldn't say you're idle, but you're just in a position to focus more, in a more refined way, on an object like the breath. And that's correct, good. Of course, we do have to talk and communicate to people through our day, whether it's work, family, social needs, whatever. So that's part of your practice, and the Buddha understood that very well, and he gave this teaching of the Noble Eightfold Path, and one factor is the practice of right speech. And right speech is not lying, not saying malicious things, abusive, coarse things, and not engaging in idle chatter, or foolish, pointless, frivolous chatter. These are the guidelines for right speech. So the Buddha didn't say be silent, he just said practice right speech. When it's necessary to talk, we talk. When there's a need, a purpose, we can talk. But we try to talk with mindfulness and these following these guidelines. And you'll notice if you follow those guidelines, then it tends to mean your mindfulness is not straying away, you're not too scattered, it's not going to disturb your practice. If you do talk a lot of untruths, malicious speech, idle gossip and so on, well, that will fill your mind with all kinds of unwholesome mental states. It will feed it, and it will make it harder to settle down in meditation. But if you practice right speech as much as you can, it won't interrupt your meditation or the flow of your mindfulness. It's just when you're speaking, you're mindful of speech and the mental fabrications lying behind your speech, the moods and the thoughts you're forming in your mind. You practice mindfulness directed to them, and then you consider what is right speech or what is good speech. The Buddha said good speech is speech that's rooted in kindness, it's beneficial or useful, it's said at the right time and using friendly language. So these are another set of guidelines for skillful speaking, and that requires mindfulness, clear comprehension as well. So speech is part of our life. It's necessary to communicate, and we can learn to communicate and practice mindfulness. So like you say, when you finish the conversation, the speech, you go back to being mindful of something else. Maybe it has to be a work activity, a task or something you're doing. You can't yet go off and sit and watch your breath. And that's, again, just a fact of life, isn't it? There are times when you have to eat or wash or clean up or talk or do jobs of work. Especially if you're a lay person, you have some kind of job that you go to and earn money. Well, that will be part of your mindfulness practice, being mindful of those activities, concentrating, putting your mind on those activities. And if you really take them on as part of your practice, you can develop mindfulness as you type, as you talk, as you drive a car, as you do this, do that. Probably the hard part is interacting with other people who are not perhaps Buddhist or practicing in the same way and have different values and standards, and some of them won't keep precepts, some of them may be aggressive or difficult people. We have to adjust to all those things. So another quality that helps is the practice of metta and karuna, mindful metta, kindness and compassion, and patience in daily life as you switch between talking to people, doing work, and then you have more free time on your own. But we have to learn to maintain a steadiness of effort and mindfulness throughout our day and throughout all these different activities, and that's our aim. To free the mind from mental defilements which may be stimulated by any number of situations. If we just spend all our time on retreat, in the cave, in the room, and never come out, there may be a lot of mental defilements we don't yet know about. It's only when we come out, suddenly they overwhelm us when we're in new situations. So if you have to engage with the world, you have to work, go do many things, well, practice mindfulness and learn and learn to recognize mental defilements arising. Go through it. What mental defilements, greed, anger, delusion, and all their offshoots, what arises in the workplace most often from conversations, what kind of mental defilements are stimulated. Reflect in this way, both based on your past experience and then present moment experience, and then you can also plan and develop strategies how to be careful not to engage with mental defilements in these situations, how to practice letting go as you're working or as you're with people talking. And this is part of our practice, something we have to learn, how to maintain mindfulness as we interact with the world, how much to talk, how often to talk, the different kinds of activities we're involved with. Of course, sometimes we don't have much choice, but sometimes we have choice. There'll be some activities you're involved with which are probably not very conducive to mindfulness and cultivating the Dhamma. Maybe you have to let them go a bit. This is all areas for reflection and learning to see what supports the practice and what doesn't. And just try and keep a good attitude if you're in a situation where you're losing your mindfulness, you're becoming distracted by conversations or activities. Try and keep a good attitude so that when you regain awareness, you don't beat yourself up too much. You accept, I lost it there, now I've got to restart. Okay, I go back to square one, back to the beginning, re-establish my mindfulness and carry on. Every moment is a new moment, so we don't really need to carry a lot of self-criticism around. If you've just lost your mindfulness in a conversation or something, okay, start afresh, and it's a new moment, isn't it? And you can bring up mindfulness in any moment and start again. And that's the important thing, is the present moment. You learn from mistakes and things that happened in the past, but then you have to let it go. No need to dwell on it too long. If you find there's a particular mental defilement that you're prone to, a particular weakness, you get irritated or angry, you indulge in certain pleasures, you become distracted, scattered in certain situations. As you reflect more and practice more, you'll pick up on where your weaknesses are. Then you can establish some guidelines for yourself, plan how you're going to deal with these weaknesses, maybe change your approach, or at least just be more on your guard, more mindful in those situations where you're going to become irritated or indulge your desires or get scattered. You can plan and introduce new practices to deal with certain situations so that you can prevent mental defilements arising, or if they do arise, you've got to plan how to let them go. We have to think this all through. That's part of the practice. Another question. How do we cope with people around us who are cruel or prejudiced in the way they talk? Well, that's similar to the last question. We have to maintain mindfulness, practice right speech, but also be very patient, tolerant, and be aware of the mind that's critical and judgmental of other people. If you find other people are cruel, maybe the first reflection might be ask yourself, can I do that? Am I capable of that? Can I speak in that way? It's very easy to criticize others when we see their faults. So we have to ask ourselves, can I do that? Do I still do that? Even if you feel you're sure you don't speak or act in those ways, just because we're more disciplined or more mindful or understand some aspect of the Dhamma, we shouldn't be caught into looking down, in a conceited way. That becomes like arrogance. Even Dhamma practitioners can become arrogant in the sense where you can look down on others who don't practice Dhamma or don't keep precepts. You have to watch out for that sort of way of looking at things. Maybe try and develop compassion, even though those people may be cruel and it's ugly and unpleasant, but try to develop compassion in the sense you're seeing that this is an expression of suffering and will lead to more suffering. And you're not encouraging them, condoning them if they talk or act in a cruel, unpleasant way, but you know it's leading to suffering for them. So rather than being angry, practice compassion. If you're close to them, maybe you can help them. If you're not that close to that person, maybe there's nothing you can say or do, but if you yourself are practicing the opposite, so you're practicing kindness rather than cruelty, mindful speech rather than speech that expresses prejudice, if you practice what you understand as the right way to practice, good practice, indirectly or subtly, this is still helping those people. You're providing a good example. You're not giving in to their way of doing things, going down to their level, as it were. In the long run, that can have a good effect. Obviously, you have to be patient and endure, and it's not always easy, but we have to stick to what we understand as important and see as important. Our values and what we see as the right way to practice. We have to stick to that if we feel it is the right way, and not let other people's behaviour affect us. That's our aim. And without, as I said, without becoming too critical of them, but we carry on with what we know is best. And sometimes we just ignore other people. Sometimes we just have to be very patient with them. We just do our best because people around us there are many kinds. And some people can be cruel. If it's someone you can talk to, or maybe you can talk to them about it, but that's not always possible. If they're being cruel to another person or animal or something, well, maybe you can go and help. If you see there's a need, somebody else is suffering, being bullied or hurt, you can maybe help, that person. The bully will have to work it out for themselves. They have to learn to change for themselves. And maybe that's more than we can do. But we can focus maybe more on the victim or the one who's on the receiving end. Try and help them, support them. Last question. Ajahn Are the pure abodes the same as the pure lands? Well, the pure abodes sounds to me like a translation of the Sudawasa realms, Brahma realms, based on the practice of the jhanas, and these are very refined states that people who have developed jhana and are anagamis, non-returners, go to when they die. If they're not yet arahants, they're reborn in one of the 5 Sudawasa realms. They're based on the practice of jhana and also being a non-returner. Other people aren't born there. Interesting, they say those realms, in periods when there's no Buddhism, no Buddha, no Buddhism is taught, those realms become kind of like vacant, empty, until a Buddha arises again and more non-returners appear through people practicing what the Buddha taught. Then they may be reborn in these pure abodes, the Sudawasa realms. The pure lands, well, I think that's referring to what we call Pure Land school of Buddhism, perhaps, which is part of the Mahayana tradition and very popular throughout parts of Asia. They call that something similar. They say the realm of Sukhawadi, the realm of bliss, which people practicing Pure Land Buddhism aspire to be reborn. But there's a little bit of digression or difference between this and Theravada teaching. Pure Land, many people believe there's this possibility to be reborn in Sukhawadi, where there's a Buddha who will teach you and you'll get enlightened there, which the Theravada teaching wouldn't back up from the text, but people have this belief that there's this realm you can aspire to practice to attain rebirth in. And those people tend to have very strong faith and often are very dedicated practitioners, often doing many good things. So it's clearly there's a difference, isn't it? Pure abodes is realms, Brahma realms, that the Buddha did mention. Pure land, we say, is something that's developed after the Buddha. So different aspirations that people have in their practice. Perhaps some of the teachers might say, well, practice for the Pure Land here and now, rather than practicing for some future benefit, future existence in some place described as a sort of perfect, blissful place that you may be reborn into. You try to practice letting go of the causes of suffering right here, right now. That may result in being reborn in a good place, but the place of practice is right here, right now. Because often Buddhists have this weakness. They're often practicing for this future event, this future thing. Theravada can be the same, practicing for Nibbana at some point in the future. And it can be a bit of a lazy way of looking at things, because you're practicing for the future, so then you're maybe not so observant and trying so hard in the present. Can lead to maybe complacency or accepting certain defilements come up in your mind, in your life. But you're practicing for this future happiness, blissful rebirth or Nibbana at some far off point, and then you tend to you neglect or don't try very hard with the defilement that's coming up right here, right now. It's kind of like, I'll fix that later. It's a bit like when you have something, you got a leaky tap or something, and it's, I'll do that later, can't be bothered doing it now. It can be a bit like that, I'm going for Nibbana later, or I'm going for rebirth in the Pure Land later, but this anger I'm experiencing right now, I'll just put that to one side. So one of the messages I get from Ajahn Chah, from the Buddha's teaching is, whatever's coming up, deal with it right now. The defilements have to be seen as impermanent, as not self, and the cause of suffering right here, right now, and abandoned right here, right now. If you aspire to Nibbana or rebirth in a Pure Land, blissful abode, blissful place, then you have to abandon defilements. No way around it. So if you really want, if that's what your aspiration is, the way you'll get there is abandoning it, greed, anger and delusion in the present moment when it arises. Something to think about anyway. So that's the end of the questions for tonight. We will wish you well with your practice, whether you're from the Mahayana tradition or the Theravada tradition. May you all attain success, enlightenment. If you are aspiring to become a Buddha, I wish you all the best on your long path to that, but we wish you success as well.